Hey everyone, Andy Park here. So this was part 1 and part 2 of how to paint Marvel gods. Let's get into part 3. Okay, this is part 3. Now that we've done realistic renderings of Thor and Loki, I thought part 3 would be a chance to have a little bit of fun. Something I like to do. Most of you might know my work from Marvel Studios, doing realistic renders of the heroes and villains that you see in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. But what you might not know is that I love doing cartoony drawings and paintings. I love doing caricatures. It's something I love to do on the side in my sketchbooks or when I'm doodling. And the thing about doing it in a more cartoony form is that you're breaking it down to its essentials. So especially when you're doing more of a caricature, as I discussed in part 1 and 2, Thor has more of that box shape or rectangular, whereas Loki has more of that triangular shape. So always kind of keeping that in mind and exaggerating, pushing, trying to get the essence of the characters, but cartoonizing them, if that's a word, and exaggerating. This kind of stuff is really fun, trying to get the essence of the character, but pushing things, exaggerating. So with Thor, I'm playing around using the same chalk brush that I used in the first 2 tutorials, which is the standard chalk brush that comes in Photoshop. And then the great thing about doing digital is, you can push and pull like what I'm doing right now with the warp tool and the transform, and you can kind of play around. And since it's in layers, you can try it out. If you don't like it, just go back, and there's always an undo. And now going for Loki, just sketching him out, always keeping in mind, basically like a guitar pick, he's a triangle. His features are more inset, so I'm exaggerating that, pushing everything in the middle. And he's got very small features, not necessarily his nose, but his eyes and mouth are pretty small and pushed into the center. He's got a bigger forehead, so I'm exaggerating that. His eyebrows, the way they turn, that's another unique feature of him. So, and he's got bigger ears, so here, I'm pushing it, but this is just an early sketch, so things will get adjusted as I go. But I'm trying to capture just the general look and feel. His eyebrows do tend to go that, turn downward from the center down, or to the sides downward, whereas normally you would think a villain would go the other way. So it's one of his kind of defining features, at least whenever I look at Tom Hiddleston or Loki. So this is just a sketch phase, pushing, pulling. The great thing about doing digital drawings, what I love is you can always just erase out. You can on the fly change things, whereas obviously you can do that in paper and pencil, but in digital it's just so much easier to edit. That's the power of digital, is the power of editing. Just like I'm doing right there. So it's to me, it mimics drawing combined with painting, and that's what I love about digital mediums. I love to paint, I love to draw. In drawing, especially when you start getting into inks and that kind of thing, it's harder to edit. You have to kind of know what you're doing and know which lines you're putting down. Of course, you can do whiteout and change things, but it is not as easy versus in digital. It's very much like painting. When you're painting, not necessarily with watercolor, but with acrylic or oil, you could always just paint opaquely on top of what you have. There, I just used the Edit Transform Warp tool, so you can warp it around however you like. The power of Photoshop. So here, I'm just creating a new layer, and I'm refining the drawing, always emphasizing the square nature of him. And now that I have the underline sketch, I'm kind of just looking at his features of Chris Hemsworth, Thor, and doing exaggerations, giving him a little bit of an expression. This stuff is really fun for me because I just love doing cartoons. I mean, before I started getting into like concept art for film or video games, a lot of you might know I was a comic book artist, and as I was kind of making a transition out of comic books and I went to art school, I did contemplate very seriously about possibly getting into animation. So that was one direction, like a fork in the road that I could have gone, but I ended up going more the digital painting, kind of more video games, and then ultimately into live action film. No regrets, but I still love cartoons. I love animated styles. I love exaggeration. I love caricatures. So it's something that I do on my own for fun, and this is a fun opportunity to be able to do it here on my channel. So I'm flipping back and forth because I'd always, just like in the other videos, I talked about how flipping the canvas always helps to see your mistakes, proportions, to make sure things are looking correct. Because once you see it in a different orientation, that's when you notice things that you don't when you're just staring at something in one way. So when I used to draw comic books, I would hold it up to the mirror, or I'd hold it up to the light above me to kind of see it in the reverse. And then I would see, oh, one eye is above the other, or I see weird proportions. So then you're able to adjust and make those kind of corrections. So I think the drawing part is pretty much there. I'm pretty happy. Now I'm just gonna colorize, paint. I'm not gonna spend that much time into rendering, but it is gonna be more of a quicker, suggestive, quick, adding colors to these drawings. The theories are pretty much similar to the realistic paintings that I was doing, and the techniques were, at first, what I just did, I darkened the lines by adding a clipping mask, and I chose the color of that line layer, and I can just paint into that, and it'll only paint into those lines that I created. And now I'm painting underneath opaquely so that the lines won't be affected. Eventually I'll paint on top as well, but I'm still trying to preserve the lines. There's so many different ways of painting, so many different techniques in Photoshop that allows you to kind of go back and forth. But yeah, a lot of stuff you're seeing right now is very similar to my approach when I was painting more realistically, thinking about blood vessels. So that's why the nose and the ears have more of a red, and I'm exaggerating, knowing that I'm going to be going over it as well, so things will get more nuanced. Another clipping mask, and I'm adding more of a brown color, darken some of the lines, adjusting to colors that you see in the bottom right in the hue saturation window, HSB, hue saturation brightness window. And I always adjust the colors here and there just to give it a little bit more life. You could always just stick to a couple colors, but I like the nuances. Just like in when you're doing a realistic real painting, there are so many nuances. Even though you might say the color of a skin is more like a peach color, but there's reds, there's blues, there's so many different there are lots of different versions of gray and saturation. So I'm always moving the color in the HSB window. And you can see here that I'm painting with a darken layer. And what a darken layer does is basically I'm doing that because I want to preserve the line art. So as long as I paint a lighter value than the lines, then the lines will remain. So I can paint on top of them, but the lines will still be shown as long as the value that I'm painting is lighter than the lines, then it won't cover those lines, if that makes any sense. And here, just another way I decided to select all the lines that are already there, and I was like, might as well just paint that way rather than doing the clipping mask. I can just darken the lines using this method. one thing I want to note is that when I paint, I do tend to get a lot of layers. One of the reasons is because I sometimes like to go back to see my progression. So occasionally I will look back where I started and then the progress that I've made. The other reason is because I don't like thinking too much about the technicalities of the layers of like, okay, this is only the line layer, so I have to always make this line layer clean, and then I can only touch the lines in this layer. So I do tend to paint more intuitively. So sometimes I will use that clipping mask, other times I will just select all the lines in that layer, which essentially acts like a clipping mask. And sometimes I'll paint on top, kind of go back and forth. I want my drawings and paintings to be as free from technicalities and thinking of techniques and trying to be so organized, and I just want to be more free in the way I paint and being able to have fun and enjoy the process rather than thinking about being too organized in my layer system. Some other people, like one of my coworkers, a guy named Jackson Z, he paints totally different than me, and he's very organized. So he does like whole paintings with like 5 layers because he's got a background layer, he's got a figure layer, and then so forth. But my brain just doesn't work that way. I like to just be more intuitive and paint on the fly. So eventually I start gathering more and more layers. So it's up to you, however you want to work. But the more you do Photoshop paintings, you will learn more and more what layers do, the techniques, and you'll be able to cater it to how you paint, and you'll basically be able to use it to serve your purposes. So here, just like in the realistic paintings, I'm painting different colors, nuances, values, subtleties. As you paint and colors start blending, then you can color pick within the painting. So that's what's fun, being able to really treat this like a real painting, but not going as rendered and nuanced as the realistic painting that I did in part 1 and part 2. I'm keeping this looser, and at the end of the day, I decided to do this because I thought it'd be fun, and I, definitely had a lot of fun just playing around. I don't get to draw and paint in this kind of style very often, but I love to kind of do different styles like this. Sometimes they're even more cartoonier. So it's just really fun. I'm just a fan of art in general. So even the artists that I follow on social media, I don't just follow people who paint like me in realism. No, I love following and looking at art from realism to cartoony to graphic to anime styles. I love it all because I'm just a fan of good art, and they all juice me up. So I love practicing in all different styles. And by the way, the Thor and Loki I'm painting is from Thor Ragnarok. I had the pleasure of designing Thor on that movie, and Loki was designed by Anthony Francisco. So here I'm adding the quite saturated, probably the most saturated part of the paintings, in the corners, in the dark corners of the eyes, the nose, the nostrils, because there's a lot of times you don't want to just paint them black. They can kind of look black at first, but if you decide to paint a lot of the darks with a saturated color, I think it gives it a lot more life. Yeah, once things are just blacks, again, like I almost never want to use a black color or white in your painting. Of course there's times when it will call for that, but for the most part you want to try to avoid that as much as possible, because in real life you rarely see white, pure white, or black, unless there's no light in the scene, like at night. But even then, you can really push it to be like really dark, dark blue. That'll like. So now I'm adding little details in the eyes, and as you can see, I'm going back and forth because I don't want to just get stuck on just painting one area and one character. I like going back and forth so that as I'm painting, I'm building up both of them, to a similar level. Because I know I'm not gonna, if you end up painting just one, and then, you go up to a certain amount, which is that's totally valid way to go. But the whole point is I want to build these up in the same way and the same level. So, whenever I decide to finish, they'll both be done essentially at the same time. So it is the way I like to paint, kind of going back and forth. Just like if I'm just only doing one of these paintings, one character, I'm not just sitting there painting the eye and spending all that time zooming in. If you've watched the other two parts of this, part 1 and part 2, you'll see that I very rarely zoom in. And I know I got that question in the comment section, and I explained it before because it's something that I do because I want to always remind myself of the bigger picture. The bigger picture is more important than the details. So, you can paint an eye and have it the most amazing eye in the world, but if that eye does not work in the context of the bigger picture of the whole face and head, then that painting failed. So it's more important that the overall is what that's what you're focusing on. Because a lot of times if you see like a lot of paintings, a lot of times like the head will be rendered in more detail than the legs, because at the end of the day, we as humans, we focus in on the head. So it is very important that a lot of times in figure paintings and character design paintings, the head is like really solid. And then within the head, the eyes are the most important things. So there's different tiers of like importance. And this is nearing the end, as I did in the other tutorials. I'm using the liquify tool to push and pull to really edit. And this goes along with what I was saying, why digital medium is so amazing, because you can't do this with traditional. So going back and forth to see the difference, just to refine, because I was painting it knowing that there was some problems with Loki. Well, I hope you enjoyed this 3-part series on how to paint Marvel gods. I had a lot of fun. I hope you got something out of it and learned maybe a thing or two. If you haven't already, please subscribe, like, share, and let me know in the comments what you'd like to see from me in future videos. Until next time, take care.